So we're not trying to do anything crazy. It's definitely a different journey than I ever expected to take last year. I'll get out of you guys' space.
Sorry.
All right, guys. We'll start to kick off. So, you can go this one.
Okay, good day, Dave. How you going? Yeah, hi. Good day, Dave.
Right now, we're also we're streaming this one live on YouTube, so you get to watch this again, which is fantastic. All right, so thanks everyone for coming in tonight. Great turnout again. Normally go through some news and stuff, but I'll run through that quickly. It's not really that much happened since last time we spoke, I guess. So for those who don't know, my name's Lucas. I run the meetup here. Miss Katrina has just come in, and Karina as well. We've been running since March 2013 in the Bitcoin space, and the numbers keep growing with obviously the price. So now that we're in August, we've probably got about 3 or 4 new meetups. I try and do one a month, but we all have other commitments outside of this. So I'll try and do some 101 Bitcoin stuff again coming up. And then we try and have a Christmas party in December. So we've probably got about 3 months of September, October, and November of meetups, then the Christmas party in December. For the news, we'll also try and do like a community news too, to try and cross-promote everyone's ideas and startups. So last month we did a bit of a hackathon for Jeff up there with eating pizza. He's a startup, so he's trying. This is his dinner for the week. So, so yeah, we had a bit of an Ethereum hackathon with the Ethereum guys. Hopefully it went alright. We learned something, so we'll try and carry that on. Maybe once a month, do some dev stuff, or some really coding and building a supply chain around beer for Jeff. That's his startup. And we've also, I said I'll shout out to some other people we've got. Who was the gentleman over there? Sorry, I forgot your name.
Anthony.
Anthony, that's right. So did you want to give your little thing a plug in? We might have a meetup all about you.
Yeah.
So
happy to do that.
What's your, in a couple of seconds, what's your little blockchain?
So we've got a blockchain lending platform. So we digitise traditional loans that have a fixed income. And we tokenise the cash flow, and the tokens are made available to sell on both private and public exchanges. And we've got an enterprise deployment taking place now.
And what's the name of your company?
Athera. Yeah, we're currently working with Ernst & Young, ABN AMRO on reimagining securitisation in the Netherlands. And we're working with a consortium of 28 banks in Japan who are leading our Series A round as well.
Fantastic stuff. So we've got some innovation happening up here and good stuff happening. So we'll do a meetup. You can plug all the business, come along with some stuff. And Richard Shannon is also doing some cool stuff. Do you want to give you a shout out to?
Yeah, sure. So starting a startup called Worldview, so enabling individuals to take control of the personal data that we're creating online, enabling people to squeeze the very most amount of value from that data. That does ultimately include enabling people to sell as little or as much of their data as they wish, directly with end purchases of market insight or market research, looking at using blockchain as a way of facilitating and securing that marketplace, that transaction of personal data and assets. So if you have any ideas about that, more than happy to have a chat later on if you've got any time.
I'm sure we'll stick around for beers afterwards too, so we'll put them aside. Also, thanks to the sponsors. We've got ThoughtWorks here tonight, pay for the beer, and Pizza. Guru from ThoughtWorks there helps do all the logistics and the planning. So thanks to Guru for sorting that out. And then on that, this is a volunteer thing. It's free. We want to keep it that way. So we do get sponsors who pay for the staff. Any capacity, just email the group. We've got a Telegram group, or email and we can get it on. Or if you want to plug your startup, feel free. So I think that's probably it. So now I guess this all come about because a couple of weeks ago we're down in Parliament House for the Friends of Blockchain, whatever that was. So a party for a party to promote a technology that will hopefully overthrow government. So I thought it was quite ironic. But I managed to record one speech, Senator Humes. I missed Nick's fantastic speech. Nick from ADCA, ADCA, whatever they're called.
Yeah. Oh, it's still
ADCA. Yeah.
Just cut a C up.
Just drop the C. So they invited us down there. So the idea was to foster innovation within Australia, have the conversations with the powers that be. Anyway, it's quite the night. So we're having some beers or wines on the taxpayers' money. And Max said, hey, I'd love to do a talk next Thursday. So I said, all right. And then I think yesterday we emailed him and said, hey, he's still coming up. He goes, better book a flight then. So here he is. I'll let him tell his story. So without further ado, here's Max from Flux.
Cheers. So thank you everyone for coming along. This is a fantastic turnout, so I'm really pleased you can be here. Thanks as well to Lucas and Blockchain Brisbane, or Bitcoin Blockchain Brisbane, as well as to ThoughtWorks for putting tonight on. I presume you're all at least a little bit familiar with the idea of Flux. And I want to, I guess, give you a bit of a warning. So tonight is very experimental in that usually when I give a talk, I end up talking far more about the tech or far more about our system and the economics that goes into it. And then I get very excited about how we can trade different vote tokens to sort of create a system that biases the production of knowledge, which turns out is probably a good thing for democracy. But I'm not going to talk about that tonight. I've got some good lectures online. I talk about some stuff I link you to stuff at the end. But tonight, I want to do a bit more of an experiment. As you can see, it's an experimental talk. So I apologize in not so much advance for not really following the ethical guidelines of psychology and letting you know in advance. But particularly, if anyone has any criticisms or feedback about the talk, then I would love to hear them. So just a heads up that this is not the sort of talk I usually give. Hopefully, it's going to be far more conversational, and which we'll see in a moment. So, FYI. So the point of this talk is far more about sort of, I guess, discussing the why and the people and the journey and the emotion and things like that instead of the what. It's not a description of our voting system. It's not a claim about our tech. If you do want to know about that, then I'm totally happy to talk about it. Questions at the end, that sort of thing. So yep, technical questions at the end. I've got some fun stuff that I can show you as well. So stay tuned for that. Basically, if you've got any relevant questions to what I'm talking about at the time, then just stick your hand up because I think that's going to make a better talk for me and a better talk for everyone else. So yeah, so don't feel at all sort of afraid of just continuing the conversation in a direction that you'd like it to go. In terms of the plebiscite discussion, we can talk about that, but only after the talk. Yeah, as you might imagine, I do end up talking about it quite a bit. So yeah, there's time for that later, basically. Now, I guess the first thing to notice there is I've italicized this, and I italicize a bunch of words throughout this to sort of give a bit of a different meaning. If you've done any introductory philosophy, then there's this really nice exercise that they talk about, which is about friends. And they just emphasize each word in succession. So we should not speak ill of our friends, or we should not speak ill of our friends, and so on. So that's sort of what I'm trying to channel there. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a bit of an experiment with communication particularly. It is not just for me to try and practice being more personable and sort of more on a level that's relatable, but also just to try and figure out what works. Hence the request for criticism. Now, the other reason for doing this is that Lucas asked me to, and he said, give them your story. And so here is this talk. And yeah, very interested in feedback and criticism. So come find me after the questions if you've got anything that you'd like to think could improve things. So then, yeah, why am I doing this? And so this is just about me, right? This is a very short version. I talk a little bit more about this sort of stuff later. I have traditionally not particularly liked talking about myself, so that might be either a bit too long or a bit awkward or whatever else, FYI. I was thinking we might have some sort of criticism, sort of feedback mechanism, as in, we've got the hand up for conjecture to ask for stuff, and then it's like, if you think that I'm just talking too much and talking about crappy stuff, then like raise a fist maybe.
People just leave.
And we'll just, or just leave. I mean, that would work as well. It hurts my feelings, but other than that, it's okay. So in terms of why am I doing Flux? Why did we started this about 2 years ago? Go back further, and the main thing there is that I feel compelled to is that at this point in my life, and at that point, there was nothing more that I could do to satisfy this sort of desire within myself, and that's sort of what started that. And the reason for that is a rational meme called fallibilism. I usually talk a lot more about fallibilism than I will here. It's a philosophy, and basically it sort of is this idea that we can always be wrong about everything. Is that we're still justified in believing things, and the truest things that we can find, the best explanations we can find. But at the end of the day, we're always mistaken on stuff, and we can always get better. And that is this meme is really what has driven the direction and progress of Flux, and the reason that we've gone down the paths that we have. I'm sure a lot of you are aware about like some other organizations. There's my vote down in Melbourne, direct democracy, online direct democracy, based actually here in Queensland. There's Democracy OS or Democracy Earth and the Net Party and a whole bunch of other parties around the world that all have similar-ish ideas. And the reason that Flux is different is fallibilism. So I'll talk in passing about it later, but I highly recommend that you all have a look at it in your own time, because it's been incredibly valuable to my life. Yeah, so more later. So the first thing is why this? Why are we working on it? Why do I feel compelled to do it? What do we actually get out of this that we don't get from other systems? Politics really sucks. I think we can all probably agree on this. It is slow, it is cumbersome, they make mistakes all the time, they don't correct their mistakes. We have these, polarizing elections, people, disintegration of society, world in flames, all this sort of stuff. Politics really, something needs to change. It does some things very well, but it does other things very badly. And I think we all agree that things can be better. So Flux claims it can make things better. This alone seems like a pretty good reason, but it gets better. So imagine really the end goal here, the reason that we're doing this thing that'll happen in like 20 years, not that'll happen tomorrow, that we're really after. It's a few things wrapped up in one, but I think it's the sort of future that we're striving for is one that I hope that we can all get behind. So the first thing is that if we used like the Flux system in totality, then based on our own predictions, politics would be generating solutions and not problems. It wouldn't be creating divisions between people, it would be enacting real policy that can help people's lives and is crafted by the people whom the problem affects. Whereas right now it's, there's a very small section of society that crafts policy, and generally speaking, that's not the people who are affected by the problem. So that's sort of the first point there. The second is that Flux is a system where minorities can speak for themselves, right? Where minorities can actually have real potential to implement policy that they feel is good to solve the problems affected to them, and they don't need to ask permission from anyone else. So an easy example is the Indigenous population is about 3% of Australia, which means that under a European parliamentary system, the Indigenous folk need to convince 47% of Australia in order to actually improve the policy that governs them at a federal level. I think that's, not mince words, it's a pretty shit situation. And the fact that we have a system of governance that is so poor or requires so much permission, so much bureaucracy and baggage, I think is something that not only can we improve on, but it's a great evil that it's important to improve on and important to care about. The idea of like vibrant, continuous, and constant progress. Now that might sound a bit like, continuity and change, but this is the reality of fallibilism, is that fallibilism is a way of creating knowledge consistently and always improving on your knowledge. And that's what we try and bake into the basis of the really at the ground level of Flux and our system of democracy, issue-based direct democracy. And I think that's something we can get behind, or at least I'm behind it. The next, I guess, far more emotional topic, and maybe some of you who already have children sort of wish this happened a bit earlier, but creating a system where your children don't have to worry about politics. Right now, it feels like, you know, the world is sort of throwing politics in our face, and it's necessary to worry about it, to worry about what we can do, to worry about who to vote for, all that sort of stuff. And I don't think that's good. I think that it's much better to have a world where we don't have to worry about it, and rather it's a voluntary opt-in thing because you see some new solution that might solve some problems, and you go after that. You're not going in there because it's a really bad situation that you want to fix. And if we can solve that problem, if we can solve like the problem of bad democracy for good, I do like puns, by the way, so that's why that's there. But if we can solve the problem of bad democracy for good, then your children are not going to have to worry about this. In fact, no one's ever going to have to worry about this again, because the chance of you coming up with a solution that's good and also hasn't been implemented yet becomes vanishingly small the more and more people that get involved. And so that's the sort of system that we want. We want a scalable solution. We want something that, you know, really involves people, that enables the best ideas to really come to the top as quickly as possible. And so that's why I'm doing Flux. I think that's why a lot of the people who are supporting us, why they do Flux too. So a bit more about the vision. So the idea here, we want a democracy where anyone can make a difference, where the main criteria for you being able to make a difference is having a good idea, not having a crazy huge budget or an amount of political support or anything else like that. Is that if you've got a good idea, we want to lower the barrier as low as possible, essentially, without making it dangerous, to implementing that. The next is that we want to make it easier, I sort of said this, but we want to make it easier to implement high quality policy and harder to implement low quality policy. And if anyone's interested in economics, there's a great video that I've made on it and some essays and stuff that goes into exactly how that mechanism works. But for the moment, basically, the general idea is that we make hard policy expensive and easy policy cheap, essentially, in terms of, you know, effort and political capital and things like that. We want a system where communities can like self-organize and pass the policy that they want, not the policy that someone else wants for them. So I sort of touched on that before. And we want a system where progress is automatic and a system where justice is automatic, where the default is progress, is solving problems, and the default is justice, not the exception to the rule, sort of thing. And finally, if you've watched any of my stuff on philosophy, then you'll know these two words very well because I have both specific definitions and a strong passion to get rid of them. Corruption and authority. Is that basically, I mean, they're very, very heavily entwined. You cannot rid a democracy of authority, sorry, of corruption without ridding it of authority, which I'm happy to talk about at the end. Won't go into it too much here, but that's sort of a key part as well. So the next sort of sections here are more sections about me. Again, mentioned that I don't quite like talking about myself, but I figured that it was probably good to give you a bit of history, like my history, in terms of how I ended up here and what went into me getting here. So I started caring about democracy in about 2001. Now I was like 9 at the time, and basically my thoughts were about as sophisticated as, this is really stupid, why doesn't everyone make me Prime Minister? I could do a better job, which is about as good as a 9-year-old can do. But the point is, I've been thinking about this for many, many, many years. In 2010, I discovered blockchain, really late 2010, December, just as Satoshi left actually, which was a bit of a disappointment. I had some fun. I started mining Bitcoin back then. I just bought a NVIDIA graphics card, which was a bit of a disappointment because they were about 10% as good as an ATI card. Mined about 56 Bitcoins over a month and a half. And then once I went back to uni, my girlfriend found the fan annoying at night, so I turned it off and then left Bitcoin for 3 months, which was probably a terrible, terrible mistake considering. But it wasn't all bad, obviously. I'm still ran a mining pool later that year, did a whole bunch of other stuff, done some trading, done some blockchain design, worked on distributed markets, early Ethereum dev, whole bunch of stuff like that, and that's only up to 2014. So blockchain has been a big part of this, as you may guess, given the context of the meetup. So I bought The Beginning of Infinity, which is the book that taught me about fallibilism, in 2013. That's relevant for 2 dot point cents. The first idea for what we called at the time the neutral voting block, 2013. So my dad at the time had running as a candidate for the Greens in our local thing. Someone else stepped in, so we basically, just handed out pamphlets, that sort of thing. He was quite involved and he felt quite strongly about it. I grew up in the Hunter Valley, so there's lots and lots of coal mines. I grew up on a vineyard as well, so on the agriculture side. Mum's into horses, so there's a thoroughbred thing going on. And basically, Dad particularly got really involved in politics. And this was sort of the start of my political involvement. I'd been thinking about things for a while, but I'd never done anything. And watching the election results roll in September of that year, the point of spent all day out in the sun handing out how to vote cards, and they even got 60% of the way to a quota, like 8 or 9%, and then lost it all. Of the way that our Senate works, the Herr Clark, instead of, you've got 6 seats, so you have 7 quotas, and then you throw away the last quota, things like that. And the Greens were the ones, holding the baby at the end. So, all I could think was that there has to be a better way to do this. This can't be the best thing that we have in terms of democracy. And the first idea that I had around this was actually nothing like Flux at all. It was using sort of like liquid democracy in a round robin system, voting tickets to convince all the minor parties to vote for you, seats and balance of power, and then you could just give that power away back to the minor parties, and with this round robin system, they could sort of like time share the Senate seats. So as I learned later, people do not get into minor party politics for the policy. They get in for the ego, and they are not very happy with this sort of suggestion. So that didn't work. But it was the start, and we had the core of this idea, which was that we can do more if we specialize. The specialization really only, like I'd been studying a bit of economics and stuff at the time, so that sort of tweaked, but it really only started to take shape as a proper economic system much, much later on, but it was there from the start, essentially. Now, in 2015, I actually read The Beginning of Infinity after trying to start 3 times, and that month, March 2015, literally changed my life. As in, it was the most significant piece of writing that I've ever read. It is the most significant, it's only been 2 years, but still to me now, it's the most significant thing that I've ever read. I think it probably will be the most significant thing I will ever read, because it is just such a breathtakingly profound, work of art as a philosophical work. It touches on everything from aesthetics to morality to AI to quantum physics to the nature of infinity to how does knowledge work, the relationship between evolution and knowledge, the relationship between evolution and memes, rational, anti-rational memes, why, in the limit of the sustainability argument, that's actually bad for humanity. It goes into, it literally touches on David Deutsch, I guess largely regarded as the father of quantum computation. So he was doing stuff back in the 80s. He wrote another philosophical work called The Fabric of Reality in 1998. And even though he still works in theoretical physics, he also does some philosophy.
Thank you.
So, cool. Good. Anyway, point being, I don't think I've ever had a talk where I haven't mentioned this book, so I can't leave it in. It's also bolded because it's that important. And then Flux as well, 2015, that was when it finally came about. Now, issue-based direct democracy, the system that we're using now, really only came into its own in 2016. So we actually started Flux before we really knew what we were doing, but we had enough of an idea to start. And the theme of enough of an idea to start sort of runs throughout issue-based direct democracy, and the entire way that we approach this is that we don't claim that we have all the answers. We claim that we know how to start such that we can create the answers as we go. Now, if you think this is actually exactly equivalent to the process of living in a civilization where we are always encountering new problems, and it's only the fact that we can create the knowledge to solve those problems that allows us to keep living. There's been plenty of arguments throughout the years about agriculture and Malthusian arguments saying that we'll run out of food, which has never happened. Peak oil, again, we're going to run out of oil, didn't happen. Basically, we've got to embrace this. If we say up front that we need all the answers to begin with, then we're never going to get anywhere because there are no perfect answers. Anyway, I'll leave that there. If anyone wants to talk more about issue-based direct democracy, let's do it at the end. I guess more stuff about me. So I've always had sort of a strong desire to know the truth, even if I didn't like the truth. And I think that sort of is a strong differentiator between people who get stuck in intellectual ruts and people who can make progress. There's this idea of not being afraid of being wrong, as in it's far more important to be consistently creating ideas than to even create a single like correct idea. And again, that's sort of channeled into the Flux system and issue-based direct democracy, and this idea of solving problems. And I mentioned there as well that like I'm wrong infrequently, not because I'm right frequently. In fact, I'm wrong about most things most of the time. It's just that our ability as humans to really critically reason about stuff is incredibly poor. You know, we think that the more evidence something has, that the better that idea is. But it's not the amount of evidence that something has, it's the number of refutations that that thing has. Doesn't matter how much evidence you have, if you have one refutation, then the idea is bunk. And we want to, this again is from fallibilism. And I mention it mainly because it's been something that I feel like I do differently that is, has helped me in coming up with these sort of ideas. Oh yeah, so I've experimented with every type of political ideology. In grade 10, I was an anarcho-communist. Later, I got frustrated and essentially became a fascist. That was really stupid. Sort of gone back and forward with socialism for ages. Came in with Bitcoin in 2010. A whole bunch of stuff like that. Anarcho-capitalism as well in there. And basically, every single one of those philosophies I'd realized was wrong because at the core of the philosophy, they have something other than solving problems. And if you have something other than solving problems, then inevitably your philosophy will lead to a problem that you now cannot solve. The motive is not solving problems. And so it's possible to essentially make errors. And so the only way to consistently avoid errors is to acknowledge that problem solving is this really core component, and you can build stuff on top of that. You can build a lot on top of that. Anyway, yeah, tools, blockchain, economics, fallibilism, that's my jam. So now, then, why am I doing this? Going back to that idea. Now, this idea of rational memes, I mean, one of the reasons I bring this up is because I want to spread it to you, in that I feel like this is such a powerful idea that it's sort of like it's a moral compulsion not to, almost. I mean, we spread memes all the time anyway, but sort of doing it deliberately and purposefully and things like that can really help them spread. So yeah, which there's plenty of examples of that throughout history, but unfortunately, very few examples of rational memes. By the way, I use this term rational meme. I don't actually explain it in the talk. A rational meme is a meme that engages with our critical faculties, and it survives by engaging with our critical faculties. An irrational meme is a meme that survives by disabling our critical faculties. So I'm not talking about like image macros and things like that here. I'm talking about the real core ideas that replicate bias talking and discussing and things like that. So yeah, so there's this one. This sounds a bit dramatic, but I think it's true. Literally, if we don't take the idea of problem solving so much to heart that we really focus mostly on that, which includes everything that we consider problems, by the way. It's not like we're, you know, really changing our direction, but it's just changing our, I guess, our perspective. But if we focus on other things, if we focus on other political ideologies or on who's right or things like that, then we really have the potential to create problems that will destroy humanity. So I know there's probably a reasonable proportion of you in the room that think that global warming has this sort of challenge. And I would say that global warming actually is not that much of a challenge at all, in terms of we've got 80 years of tech before the, you know, catastrophic predictions to develop. We've got all of these people, we've got more people working on this problem than we've ever had in the history of the planet. And we have more social action on this. So the problem is not finding the resources to start working on that. We've already got that. The problem is that if we don't focus primarily on solving problems, even if we don't like the solutions, then we're inevitably going to fail at solving problems. And if we do that, then we have a real risk of these sort of problems like global warming or climate change actually having catastrophic impacts. And it's not just restricted to that. There's, you know, some of you will think the same of AI. Again, I think that we can solve that problem. We can know how to deal with that in a responsible way if we focus on solving problems at that core mechanic. There's also far more obvious examples like, you know, little fingers pressing the nuke button one day. So we've got to avoid that too, but this, I think, is, in terms of the big epistemological view, that's really important. There's also just the intellectual satisfaction. This is not one of the deep points. Moral compulsion, I sort of talked about that before. Basically, you know, this meme of fallibilism makes me want to do things. In fact, all memes make you want to do things. Whenever you, like, memes only survive by being replicated. So memes that don't make you want to do stuff, don't make you want to exhibit a behavior, mean that no one's ever going to see that behavior, and then they're not going to be able to receive the meme. So there's a compulsion there. there's the idea that we need this in terms of, if we don't do this, then bad things will happen. There's this idea of eudaimonia, which I actually came across this word in 2013. It's a Greek word that sort of literally translates as good spirit, but sort of more accurately translates to the idea of human flourishing. But the way that I heard it, that I think best wraps it up, is that it's the feeling that at the end of your life, when you look back on a life well lived, that's the feeling of eudaimonia. And I feel like just knowing about that makes it, easier to aim for it. There's the purpose, that's pretty straightforward. And then there's ego. It's like, that always plays a role. It's difficult to, get up here and talk to 40 people without, thinking that you're worth speaking to 40 people. So there's that. What is Flux? Now, this is the only what part of this. Oh, that's my alarm for the bins. So, which obviously is not particularly relevant right now. What is Flux? This is the only what slide, and it doesn't really go into structural detail. It's quite straightforward. It's a movement at one stage, right? It's the idea of we've got it's a more specific meme than fallibilism. It's a meme about how we should deal with the problem of democracy, and the people who have this meme feel compelled to do something about it, and that's what we are. That's why we do it. It's also a vehicle for issue-based direct democracy. It's not in and of itself a solution. It's just a way of bringing that solution into the real land of politics. And, we do that by starting political parties. So it's a collection. Brief overview, we've got parties forming in Queensland at the moment, which I'm sure Riley's not around, but she would very much appreciate you joining up because they're in the process of registering. And then New South Wales, Victoria, and Tasmania are also forming, and we've got WA and ACT already done as well as the federal party. And it's also an attempt at political progress. I say attempt here. I believe that we're going to make political progress, but there's always that part of the thing about fallibilism is you can be wrong, and we could all be wrong about everything. But it's an attempt, and I think it's a pretty good one. Oh yeah, and Flux is life. Flux is love. The next part, I sort of wanted to talk a bit about the journey that we've been on and the story of how we got from point A to here. I told you a bit about how I got the idea to start it, but I met Nathan, our co-founder, after I come up with this idea in Sydney at a Bitcoin meetup. And particularly, we don't even remember when it was. It was either late 2013 or early 2014. We met later that year and talked about what was the neutral voting block at the time. And we decided that this was really important and we needed to do it, which was why we immediately went and did other things for a year. So the entirety of middle of 2014 through the middle of 2015, this was sitting around doing nothing. We actually then reconnected very serendipitously in 2015 at the beginning of May at a house party that neither of us were invited to. And neither of us predicted going to, so that was quite nice. And we just ran into each other in the kitchen and then spent 3 hours sitting on a fence talking about democracy and how we were going to change the world, which was good. And then we actually started. So May 2015 was, I think our first member was actually the 28th of April 2015, but May 2015 was really when we got started. Now, starting a political movement, this was something that it was a little intimidating. And for anyone else who's thinking of starting a political movement, there is a very, very important first step, which is to realize that you have absolutely no idea how to start a political movement. So we did this, we had no idea. There was a lot of paralysis and stuff. But the point was that we started anyway. The first thing we did was tweet out to the Bitcoin community, be like, hey, we've got democracy on the blockchain, we're going to change the world, this is going to be great. In hindsight, it was pretty good. It felt depressing at the time. We got about 40 members from that tweet with a few retweets and stuff like that. And at that point, we stagnated for about 6 months or 7 months before we actually figured out a recipe that would actually start working. So this was very early days, very depressing. We all had full-time jobs, no time to work on it, that sort of thing. Still called the neutral voting block, which is a remarkably unsexy name. So the next thing we worked on was we figured we've got a problem with membership, we'll focus on branding and identity. And after about 3 weeks of brainstorming one night a week with some of Nathan's friends who were involved in the advertising social media space, we came up with the idea of Flux, finally. And we got this thing. We actually went through then a long process of trying to figure out a logo. And we ended up using the logo that one of Nathan's friends mocked up on the train down to the first meeting, which we thought at the time, oh no, we couldn't use this. And then just after all this work, it turned out that that was right. So don't focus too much on branding, I suppose, is the moral there. Anyone in social media will definitely disagree with me. And then in terms of getting over the line, this was early 2016. We actually did a trial late 2015 where we started experimenting with, about 4 days before Christmas, started experimenting with Facebook advertising. And we got more members in a single day than we'd ever had in the history of every, like, you know, the rest of the membership. We'd had about 100 and we got to about 200 in a day. And so we realized, wow, this is really, really good. And then again, proceeded to do nothing for the next 4 weeks. I guess Christmas sort of, you know, is a bit of an interruption. But yeah, but we ended up spending about $3.5 grand on Facebook advertising in total. Most of that in the sort of middle 2 weeks of January. Got us to about 750, 800 members or what, of which we could find 550 valid members. And in a terribly anxious and excited state, we drove down to Canberra to hand it in person at the AEC. And we you know, looked up the address. We know we can go in person. Found this big, glamorous building. Looked fantastic. We're like, wow, this is going to be epic. Walk in there. See, we're like, where is the AEC? And see, off in the corner, there's a little pull-up banner with like AEC this way. And we followed this down a corridor into this very small room that was about maybe 4 by 6 meters maximum. There was a small front area and then like 4 desks in the back with 1 receptionist. None of the desks were occupied. And in this, you know, very small room that totally violated all our expectations, we managed to hand in our membership list, and that was all good. Then we went to Parliament House, took some photos, that sort of thing, because you got it. In terms of building the organization after that, this is something that I guess we've probably struggled with the most, and even now we're not that great at it. It turns out it's really hard to find volunteers and get them to work like long hours for free. I don't know why, but it's been difficult. Around election time, it's actually really good. Everyone gets really charged up around election time. You know, we don't ask them for like, you know, full-time work or anything. Usually we aim for about sort of 5 hours a week minimum to justify the overhead of just starting to manage people. But so that's sort of coming along nicely. We're getting better and getting practice, but it's definitely been the main challenge, I think, more than any of the tech or anything like that. And then, okay, so this part of the talk I wanted to include just for perspective. And I saw this sort of illustration put quite recently. And mostly, I guess it's more about the amount we've got to do relative to the amount we've already done. And so some comparisons. Labor's existed for like 116 years now. They've been around for a while, since nearly day dot. The Liberals came out of another party that collapsed, Country Party maybe they were called, something like that, around the end of the war. And so the Liberals basically took all their members, started a new party, all that sort of good stuff. The Tasmanian Greens got started, roughly speaking, the movement got started in about 1972. They didn't register for another 10 years. And it was only 1983 that they got their first senator. So again, they were quite well established as a movement at that point, and Bob Brown had run for as an independent many times before that. The Australian Greens started in 1992 properly, and their first senator was in 1996 when the Tasmanian Greens merged in with the Australian Greens, and Bob Brown, already being a senator, joined the Australian Greens. That little dot on the end there, that's Flux. So in terms of, we've been around for less than half the time that like the Australian Greens, already starting with a movement, took to get their first elected official. Compared to everyone else, we are tiny, 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 tiny in terms of age. Now, the reason that I put this all here is because of basically this graph, which shows you it in the other direction. And sort of like the amount, I guess, of time and effort and energy and resources that all the other parties have been able to accumulate over, you know, their minimum 25-year lifespan at this point. I mean, I think that Flux has done a fantastic job up till now. We've got 6,500 members. We've got parties in, well, I guess 3 states going on 6 or 7. And yeah, and where if you Google blockchain democracy, one of the first things that comes up. So
Max, what's the numbers up the top here?
Oh, sorry, their ages. So the Greens are 25 years old, Liberals are 72 years old. Oh, the 91, I don't know why that's there, but it is. And then Labor's 116. So yeah. Now the next, I guess, part of that is this sort of shows you a scaled version from where Flux is now, and maybe in 20 years we can be very solidly in Parliament, holding a large degree of power. And so this is by no means a short journey. I mean, we definitely thought it would be shorter than it's been, or that it's going to be. But you know, politics is hard, and we're here to stay. Essentially, is the point. Took 6 years for the Greens to get their first senator. We've only been around 2, so we will get there, I guess, is the takeaway there. Now, in terms of, I mentioned before, more details, stuff like that. If you do want more details, these are the places to go. So we've got the philosophy white paper up on voteflux.org. That's essentially fallibilism. My personal site, xk.io, it's got some essays on it. Some of the more longer ones that you know, aren't as maybe attractive to members or potential members perusing the site. There's a really, probably the best technical lecture I've ever given on it on YouTube called The Case for Flux. Really, it should be the case for issue-based direct democracy. And it's about 70 minutes. That goes into a lot of the details, both about probably existing forms of democracy, a theory we use to understand existing political power called the selectorate theory, which we also then use to create an interesting hypothesis that you'll have to watch to find out, or just ask me in a moment. We talk about fallibilism in the middle, and then some economics, and then we finally discuss issue-based direct democracy that ties all of these things together to understand problems with past democracies, understand the power structures that we're going to have to be able to essentially infiltrate to co-opt. And basically, it comes down to being able to give people a better deal, which, when you think about it, being able to solve problems is a pretty good deal compared to what we have now. Yeah, problems with democracy, selectorate theory, epistemology, finally the construction. So yeah, they're the things I'd recommend. And if you want to reach me, that's my email address, which you can find online easy enough. So I have this idea of bonus topics because I had no idea how long it was actually going to take me to get to this point. I think it's about 7:10, so we've probably done all right. If you want to discuss any of those, I'm totally happy to keep talking. But I also figure that it's probably a good time to open up to some questions and talk about anything that you guys want to talk about.
First, we'll say thanks very much to staff. It's always good to see people willing to volunteer and come, fly up from Sydney, and it's good to spend your time up here and tell your story.
Well, the weather's definitely better, so.
Wow, we come for the weather. Free pizza.
Come for the weather, stay for the people. So.
Now, before we through, I just got a couple of things. So one thing I've learnt, we're running the meetups, so people come with expertise. So I'll throw a couple of simple questions out first, and then we'll maybe go to the crowd. So first one is, why use a blockchain for voting?
Oh, okay. So this is sort of subtle in a few ways, but also reasonably straightforward once you've got the basics. So we want a few different properties in a voting system that are sort of, I think, trivial to understand. So the first is censorship resistance, as in no one should be able to stop you voting. The second is immutability, which basically is like once you've cast your vote, it's not going to change. And then the third is consensus, which is basically we need to agree on which votes are included and which votes are excluded. Particularly as well, if we're doing something digitally and we can know whether someone's voted twice, even if we don't necessarily know what their vote was, we do need to decide on one of those to include and one of those to exclude. We need all of those three. Now, usually they're all provided by a central authority. So the Australian Electoral Commission will have its doors open and let everyone come in, censorship resistance. They will lock the ballot boxes, transport them to a secure facility, and count them hopefully securely. That's our immutability. And consensus is that they just tell us which votes were included and which votes were excluded. You might notice that all of those things have one thing in common, which is that we just have to trust the Electoral Commission. Now, this isn't a problem in Australia, as in a very good Electoral Commission. We have apparently a very civil population who don't want to burn down polling stations, which is good. And we don't have a military threatening a coup. So all of these things mean that we don't have a really strong, compelling need for a digital voting system in Australia with these sort of properties. However, if you are just interested in the best digital voting system possible, then any centralized system is going to have some flaw out of those three. Whether that's, you need to trust a central authority, whether it's that you don't have a way to tell which votes were included or which were excluded, or perhaps not even to tell if someone voted twice or not. Things like that. So there's that the only way you can get those really three core properties is with a blockchain. And if you know a little bit about blockchains, then I think all of those flow pretty logically from the architecture.
Yeah. So I guess a follow-up question is, in your opinion, why can't we roll this out tomorrow? A lot of people say when the census came thing, why was it such a fail in technology? Why can't we use a system like this, Ethereum or Bitcoin, etc.? I know you've had some experience in stress testing.
Yep.
So in your opinion, what's stopping this technology being rolled out tomorrow?
So there's no good blockchain system available for voting. That's just hands down. There is no public network that can sustain what we want to do, or if it can, it doesn't have the support software already written that we need to do it. And so, as part of the whole mission to disrupt democracy for good, Nathan and myself, we sort of in parallel with Flux co-founded a startup to make commercial voting software. The idea being that we could use this as an excuse for us to work on it. While paying the bills, we could raise money, we could sell this thing, and ultimately, if we made profit, then we could bankroll Flux without needing to worry about like going after rich donors all the time, which seems like a thing that would be a nice thing to have. So basically, we need to write all this technology. We've come some of the way, but not really there yet. So I've got the voting prototype demo at the bottom, and you can see it says it's pretty raw because it is. Ethereum doesn't work because the fees are too high because of the both the storage requirements and the way that contracts and cost is calculated. Bitcoin, again, fees are too high. It's too expensive to put data in the blockchain. You can just anchor votes off-chain, but you miss out on the consensus. And so what that means is then you need to anchor off-chain plus having a second blockchain to do the consensus. And all of that together, and then you need some sort of smart contract language to be able to, or system at least, to be able to actually run your voting system. And then you need to make the user interfaces and things like that. And once you've done all that, then you can roll it out. And basically, we're not there yet. So, but soon.
Right, yes. I'll go just a bit of that. So for those who don't know, smart contracts is the idea of having a programming language within the blockchain itself, so you can have conditional-based logic. If something, whatever, and that's more with the Ethereum meetup. For guys who go to the Ethereum meetup, I guess the idea of a blockchain is we store data. Each transaction's referenced in a block, which references the other one, and that's how we can create an extended immutability and form an immutable chain or an unchangeable record of history. So that's the idea. If we can put this in there, then another property, as Max mentions, it's transparent, so we can see what's happened, and it's cryptographically secured off that. Now, I did have another question, but I forgot. So I'll throw to the floor because I'm sure there's going to be a few, and then we'll
Got one at the back there to start with.
Okay, Estonia is instituting a blockchain system that we do a proposal for. It's not to do with consensus, it's more to do with verification and showing votes on in the right place. But they'll get to where you are at a certain point. What I'm curious about is, can you go back a few slides to where you put Flux going forwards rather than going back?
This one?
That's the one, yeah. Because in a sense, look, I understand what you're saying is you're a kind of referendum-based voting system around issues that will pop up and so on and so forth. Whereas the Greens are, in a sense, a faith-based party that everyone adheres to a particular philosophical viewpoint and so on and so forth.
Yep.
So how do you then deal with the issues of fission and splintering that would occur in your system, as opposed to the way, say, the Greens might operate?
So I thought you were talking about power to start with there, but in the future of that, which I'm also interested in. But so Flux is really unique as a political party. We don't have policies, and we don't put policies forward. We're just a conduit for other people and other groups. Yeah. So the only thing that people have to disagree about within Flux at a philosophical level, at least, is this core notion that we can be wrong. That's essentially the starting point that we take. And I think that for a system of democracy, that's probably a really good starting point, because everyone has different opinions about stuff, and we can't all be right. In fact, probably none of us are right, but some of us are more right than others as such. And basically, unless we accept that we need to change, we need to make mistakes in order to learn and grow, then I think that you're always like doomed to make mistakes you could otherwise avoid.
But supposing somebody put forward the issue, let's bring back that to the country. which many of us would find completely offensive and abhorrent and so on. Now, I can see you doing that because, in a sense, that's what your platform is going to enable, if you like. So how do you, well, I mean, if you say no, on what basis do you say no?
So,
I mean, because in a sense, philosophically, you're going to open it up to all sorts of issues, aren't you?
Absolutely, and it'll be perfectly within people's rights to suggest it. But
supposed to get critical mass
for this policy,
yeah.
So, I mean, are you then saying, suppose that more than 51% of people support it?
I would say that's the worst possible coming from a country which is just voting Brexit. I would say that's the worst possible outcome that I could ever envisage. I do not want, in that respect, if you like, the demos is not the best.
I completely agree with that.
To make those kinds of decisions, we may need some kind of representative institutions, which we have. They're flawed, of course, but you know, the idea of somebody voting really, which I find important and I can't get out of, is not feasible.
So I guess maybe let's put this another way. Do you have an issue that you care deeply about?
Do I have
an issue you care deeply about?
Well,
just one.
Brexit is one of them.
I have one. It's completely different, but in a way, it's sort of analogous. Like I'm grappling with this thing. We've got nice gum trees, and I've got kookaburras, and we've got families of kookaburras that speak and sing, but they can't speak for themselves. But in a way, that's a community, and if they had an interest, it would be that they don't want their trees chopped down. But so it's like, how do you represent that? Because we could have, like, as humans, we say, well, I'm going to develop here, and I'm going to get my block. And the analogy here is that they're not almost smart enough to, you know, work in the system. But as humans, we're always going to have we're going to have people have interests at different levels who perhaps can't represent themselves. And this is sort of taken right down to a very basic level, but it's still human.
So I guess this is interesting, and it relates to your question, but is a bit different. Now, it feels like a lot of what you were asking there was around the idea of just putting equal responsibility on everyone within a democracy is not necessarily a fair way to do things, and it's not necessarily a good way to make decisions. And I would agree with that. In the case where you have, so maybe the blind community, for example, and I picked them only because you know, we can imagine that we release an app and, you know, they can't see the app and we haven't put the accessibility stuff in. One of the core ideas within issue-based direct democracy is that we don't want to do more work than we need to, and so the main way that we deal with that is to allow delegation. And so you can choose a delegate or a representative, if you want, to act on your behalf. I prefer the term delegate because it's more like someone who serves you, whereas a representative is someone who, like, you know, decides for you. That sort of thing, I think the way that you can then look at that is it only takes one person out of a normally disadvantaged community to be able to, and presumably this person is aligned with everyone else, so they're not interested in necessarily trying to, I mean, it's not like they could push through arbitrary policy anyway, but they're not necessarily interested in trying to defraud that community because they're part of it. And I think that's an important sort of feature of issue-based direct democracy is, and I mean, it applies to liquid democracy as well, is that your representatives can now be part of your community as opposed to someone who just claims to advocate for your community, which otherwise is less common. So there's that. I mean, we've got some other questions. Just to answer your question really quickly though, within issue-based direct democracy, unlike every other system that I'm aware of, besides perhaps futarchy and quadratic voting, there exists opportunity cost between issues. And so if you choose to participate and try and do capital punishment, you do so at the expense of participating in another issue. Now, lots of people feel very strongly about, I mean, you're shaking your head.
Well, I'm shaking because I don't see the opportunity cost. Because I can engage in multiple issues. I don't see how to choose one and not another. That doesn't make sense.
So so briefly go over the economics. This is going to be high level. We have two kinds of tokens. There's voting tokens and liquidity tokens. And basically, we instantiate voting tokens for each issue, and you can trade between voting tokens via liquidity. Yeah. And so what that means is that when you choose to participate in one issue, directly giving up the possibility of moving that political capital into another issue. And the end result of that is that you pretty much have to take all issues seriously, because if you choose to behave frivolously, then your net ability to influence change goes down. And I think that that's one of the things that it's the start of how we have this knowledge creation process. But hopefully that answers the question at that level. Should we go? And then
you've got on your diagram, you've got Green's 25 years, you 25 years. Do you see in 25 years for all of democracy being governed in, say, Australia in 25 years? Or do you see yourself as another political party existing
I think
process that we run at the moment?
I think we'll do better than the Greens have done in 25 years. Whether we have all the parliament or not is a difficult question to ask. One of the core sort of, I guess, design principles that we've managed to work into issue-based direct democracy is that we wanted to create a system where there is always some group who's not participating that gains by participating. And so say that you're one of the fringe factions within, Labor or Liberal. You're there because, because it's the best chance you have of getting policy passed at all, and because other people aren't going to take you, but also you have really no other options, right? Is if you want to affect change, you have to be part of a major political faction or be in the balance of power. And if you're in the balance of power, you only have very limited opportunities for that. What that means is that those fringe sort of factions there, that as long as Flux is in the balance of power, they can gain by beginning to participate within issue-based direct democracy as opposed to the old system, that block. This is both a decentralizing force as well as an adoption mechanism. And so the end goal, one of the big evils, I think, of democracy today is that the best strategy you have within the types of democracies that we have today is that you need to become the biggest bloc you possibly can. Typically, this manifests as two major parties, and even in proportional representative systems, you still end up with two major coalitions forming, because that's the stable configuration. And any party who breaks from that coalition becomes less able to influence change, and of course, that's their entire reason for existing. And so, yeah, so if we can manage this adoption idea where we're always constantly attracting at least someone, then theoretically we can grow much faster, because we can give things to those communities that they wouldn't be able to get otherwise. Because of this idea about like reorganizing political power and specializing in political power and getting the people who would otherwise leverage an issue against you, who don't care about the issue, but they recognize that you care about it. And because they've got votes, they can use that as leverage. Get them out of the picture, right? Focus on the people who really care about the issue. And by doing that, you massively amplify their power. So, there's always going to be multiple sides to an issue, unless it's really obvious. And basically, we want a system where that discussion is as pure and productive as possible, that makes the best policy as possible, and where ultimately the best strategy within issue-based direct democracy is to implement and suggest the best policy. And if we can achieve that, optimum strategy being to actually do a good job, then I think that's the end goal of democracy. But that's not the case right now, and it's not the case in any other systems of democracy that I know of. Yeah.
I was actually just going to say, if more than 50% of people want capital punishment, then that's what society wants. But it's our choice to make that failing, to realize, which we already have, we've already made that decision around the world to enact capital punishment, and realized as a society that that's not a good idea. So we need to be able, and that's kind of part of the way Flux works, is allows you to make that bad decision and then go, oh, let's fix that.
Yes.
Which is the great thing about it. The ability to vote, the mail-in plebiscite is going to take a couple of months. But if everyone inside of a Flux voting community goes, hang on, we made a bad decision, let's vote again and make sure we make the right decision. We can do that the next day.
Yep.
So that's the difference, is that when it comes to, marriage equality decision that the Howard government made, it's not like it was last month. This is quite a few years ago that this decision was made. Everyone's kind of forgets that. But now we're going to take a while to actually, and a lot of money to actually make the decision to overturn that. Whereas inside the Flux system, it really comes down to whether the community goes, yeah, we made a bad decision there. Let's take it back and let's do it again. So your fallacy side of things is what that's all about.
I got a follow-up.
So we've got some other questions. We might go here and here. Then.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you guarantee the identity of the individual that rolls up to you as one of your 6,500 members and hasn't logged in 5 times under 5 different users to get 5 voting rights?
So
how do you do the KYC?
There's 2 questions there, I think, and I can answer both. The first is, how do we know that someone's one of the 6,500 members? And at the end of the day, we don't know who voted for us, so we don't, as in the Flux system is open to everyone in the electorate. Not every, as in if we got someone in the lower house, in federally, it wouldn't be everyone in the country, it would just be the people that voted it in. And you need that to maintain certain incentives in a democracy so other people still vote for you, and they don't sort of get stuff for free. The second question there, the KYC essentially. So right now, our KYC is very basic, is that you need to provide details that validate against the electoral roll. We don't do deep authentication at all, because essentially that's not our jam. And there are so many other businesses, especially within the last 2-3 years, who are working on digital ID, that we didn't want to burden ourselves with trying to tackle that problem and, do work that other people have already done. Much better to let the specialists work on it and then just use the solution that ends up winning. Now, that said, there have been some things that have made progress recently. So Australia Post has just released I think the beta of their digital ID product. So I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but I think I've got beta access, which is really nice. So for those who aren't aware, Australia Post does they do identity validation for 25% of the population every year. And they realize that it's really stupid to make people come in and still bring 100 points of ID every time. And why don't we just use tech where we can and validate people and then have some sort of secure authentication system so that they can use their smartphone instead. And they've got some biometrics and stuff like that involved as well. So that's one way. Ultimately though, there is a fundamental problem here, which is that the authority on who is and who is not a person is registry of birth, deaths, and marriages. And unfortunately, unfortunately, we don't have an opt-in identity card. B, even though we've had the cryptographic technology or the technology about embed cryptographic protocols in credit card sized devices for as long as credit cards have been around, we have never started. And that's the evil there. It's not that we didn't use it, it's that we just didn't do it. It doesn't, a driver's license costs $250 for a 5 years license. We should stick a chip in there that is signed by an Australian government certificate that you can at least use to authenticate yourself if someone ends up building a system for it. The fact that we just haven't done that at all, I feel like is again, it's a massive mistake of policy that we could have, that someone could have suggested and changed had we had something like Flux earlier on. So at the end of the day, this is a very difficult problem to solve. Sorry, we'll come. So we've got another question here and then there. We've got it's a very, very difficult problem to solve. We're not that concerned with solving it, but we are concerned with it being solved. And basically, we're going to adopt the best tech as it comes out and use what the sort of cost equilibrium in the meantime. So SMS verification is an easy way to just cut out a bunch of spam, especially if someone gets access to the electoral roll, which, by the way, every political party just gets that for free. So I've had a DVD mailed to me that even though the application to view the electoral roll is password protected, the database on the second DVD with the actual details is not. And so you can just load that up and then just print out all that data and you see, addresses and date of birth flying past. And it's this is, and anyway, every month, any political party across the country that opts in gets a DVD sent to them of, or 7 DVDs sent to them if they have 7 branches in all the states, of all of the electoral roll details. So it's not like using that is actually that secure. It's secure because no one's exploited it, and most people don't know each other's electoral details off the top of their head. But yeah, I mean, as soon as we become economically valuable, then we're going to take a very, very serious interest in that. And we'll force members to revalidate. Like, we're not just going to let people have a free pass. So yeah, no, we do take that seriously, though we're not working on it at the moment. Cool question there.
Yeah, this answer might come out. Just the nuances is issue-based democracy. So what's your advice with someone who's voting on this system? Should I be voting for myself as largely a majority portion in society, or should I be voting thinking about minorities?
Do you mean how would you participate in issue-based direct democracy?
Yeah.
So one thing I didn't touch on that I'm not sure if it was, where was it? I think it was a slide back. So I say minorities, everyone. And the reason is that we're all minorities. The things that we really care about here, right, in terms of the things that we would actively want to spend a large portion of our lives trying to fix, right, there's a lot of those in society. And we can't all work on all the things. That what we want to work on, what we really care about at the end of the day, are going to be things that are specific to either our communities, our lifestyle, our location, our education, whatever it happens to be, but they're going to be specific to us. And so within like I guess the Flux ecosystem, the Flux economy, the Flux system, we essentially take the view that with increased specialization over time and increased access, everyone tends towards smaller, more specialized groups that do more for them. And if we can form a sort of democracy that does that, then essentially everyone is able to maximize the benefit that they get from democracy. Now, there are big issues, of course, as in, choosing to go to war is an easy one. And by the way, we don't have an answer for how we should manage choosing to go to war or how we should manage the military. There's a lot of answers we don't have. There's some naive answers about budgets, like just averaging what everyone thinks they should be spent on. This isn't the full solution. This is just how we should start. So we take the view that everyone's a minority and that ultimately the system of issue-based direct democracy incentivizes people to focus on the things that are going to matter the most to them. There are big issues like, say an environmental issue where a lot of people feel like it's really going to affect them. So you might get, 30% of the people of the population, of the voters, engaging with that issue. But one of the things that we allow is partial delegation. So instead of just choosing one delegate, you can say, okay, 20% of all my political income, both voting tokens and liquidity tokens, go to this guy over here. 20% go to this economist that I like. 20% go to this scientist. 20% go to Lucas because he's a great guy, and I keep 20% for myself. You can do that. And so even though you might have a high absolute number of people participating in an issue, that doesn't mean that's where, in this case, 30% of all the political resources are going. So basically, we have a system for decentralization. We're all part of minorities. We accommodate this within the architecture. And I think in order to really flourish, we need to really strongly specialize. The reason that we centralize for issues like, maybe the environment or objecting to capital punishment or things like that is because we perceive them as an immediate threat that we all care about. But the better we get at solving problems, the fewer of those there are. The more bigger problems we solve, we've now got more specific problems that only affect, a smaller number of people, things like that. So that's sort of the way that we see that going, is that this community is going to become more and more diverse, have more and more areas they want to focus on, and fewer bigger problems that affect everyone. Was there another question? Sorry, while
just well, it is 7:30. We will have mingle and beers, and we'll go down to the pub down the road. So maybe just a couple more.
Should we? Well, there were 3 in the back there. If we have the last 3,
yeah.
Well, no one's representing Queensland yet, but Riley in the back there is doing most of the organising at this stage. So cheers to her.
If you're interested in volunteering, being a candidate, posting a Flux banner during the election, please come talk to us.
Or being part of the group.
Yeah. That's right. So we've got 3 of our community members here, Aaron and Chris as well. So come talk to us about probably the less technical aspects of Flux, but more about if you're interested in getting involved or joining.
Yep, I'm happy to keep talking about the tech. So, yeah.
So my question is, I'm in the health space. We're building an online community and marketplace. The key function of it is the ability to create actions and projects based on voting. So we have a voting token mechanism. We have a transport that creates security around that voting token so that people can simultaneously vote on thousands of things, but they have to put energy towards deciphering what those things are.
Yep.
Is your system modular enough that we can partner in that way so we don't have to build? Because I've been following what you guys are doing. You're speaking the right language. We just need to tweak some stuff because healthcare and personal healthcare has a slightly different bent to it than trying to solve things out there. You're trying to solve things that come back to you and your community.
So the name of the startup Nathan and I founded is XO1. The product we make is Secure Vote, and that's exactly the sort of thing that we want to provide. So we essentially do bespoke voting solutions or bespoke like decentralized governance solutions. I mean, I can, the voting product is very new and we're a new startup, so it'll be some time before we're, hit the scale. But yeah, absolutely. Let's talk afterwards. Cool. And then I think last question, way back there in the back.
Yeah. Basically, over back, you were saying that some of the technical hurdles still you were based on transaction costs. Is that as current state? Because the prediction is that as it gets more and more expensive to create these tokens, it will transaction costs again, energy-wise, we're not exactly the cheap place to be.
So one thing that here's something I prepared earlier. Basically, when I find the right command. I mean, we have a custom scalability layer that we've built because that is a problem. And so our voting system, in general, runs at a constant cost over time, not per transaction. And so, I mean, I can show you here. I don't know where the limit is, but because I've been playing with things. But essentially, I'll just go through this really quickly. So this is, we're using test RPC, so it happens quite quickly. The confirmations happen quite quickly. This is essentially the full process for what you'd go through. We've already created a democracy, created a whole 200 voters. We're onboarding the voters now. We're creating 10 or 5 test issues, I think. Things like that. And then there's, 1,000 votes total. Begin voting, this is what it does. So the idea that I've spent a lot of time personally thinking about this. In fact, So it's a combination of Ethereum and our own. Our scalability layer is called Basil, which stands for Blockchain Agnostic Scalability Layer. We originally designed it to work on top of Bitcoin because of because it's at the time at least it was more secure than Ethereum. I haven't done the maths now, but it's definitely, the calculations are definitely out of date. Essentially, so the problem that you're talking about, right, the problem of what I call computational bloat, I actually mentioned before the Ethereum pre-sale in a podcast at Epicenter Bitcoin, like episode 19 or 39 or something like that. And this was a short while after I left Ethereum because I realized that it wouldn't do what I wanted to do, which at the time was decentralized exchange. So finally, after about 3 years, I've managed to actually make a scalability layer that works. And this is it working. So this is very, very early prototype. But this is how we solve that problem, is that we create a custom blockchain that operates with our rules, but also operates over the top of an existing blockchain. And that means that we inherit all of the security properties of the existing blockchain, but have none of the transaction costs. So that's our thing. Here's the voting's done, few results. Obviously Sluk is not a good democracy name, but that's what it is. You can see there's some issues, votes, some of them have gone one way or the other. One of the fun things here, so this is again just a test, so it's both the types of things going on here and the data is going to be subject to change. But essentially, we've got an issue. We've got short descriptions, long descriptions, supporting documents, start times, end times, total votes, net votes, which is just positive minus negative. You can see as well in terms of, you notice, so here, it says there's 200 votes, but then I've also only listed 10 things in the list there. And the reason for that is our anonymization system, where you can see each ballot here is, there's 20 votes on the left, and there's 20 identities on the right. And this is essentially conceptually equivalent to a ballot box, where you know that there are 100 ballots in the box, and there are 100 voters, but you don't know who talks to, who put what vote in there. And in the same way, we came up with a trustless, decentralized system for voters to be able to purely peer-to-peer create this without anyone ever being able to find out anyone else's vote. If they do try and manipulate the situation, you find out who the person who tried to manipulate it was. And basically the end result is that you end up with 20 people signing 20 votes. They know their vote is in there, but they can't ever prove to anyone their vote is in there. Anyway, so this has some really, really great properties in terms of digital democracy. So I guess I did want to show you that because we only finished it the other day. It's taken a few months, but prototype's here, and hopefully we'll have a very, very rudimentary app out in about a month, so give or take. So that's that. Anyway, yeah, thank you everyone for coming along. You guys have been great, and if anyone wants to talk more specifics or has, again, criticism about the talk, I'd very much like to hear it. So, yeah, let's chat and I'll be at the pub.
Thank you very much for coming.
Cheers. Awesome. Oh, I just said that on camera as well. Great.
I have